Good afternoon, and welcome to AWS Summit. Hopefully, you guys are having a productive afternoon. For those in the back, I'll recommend if you want to move forward, I'll be actually sharing some demo as well, so it might be easier to see from there. So this session is focused on how to layer AWS threat detection and monitoring security services. My name is Himanshu Verma. I'm part of the AWS Security Services specialized sales team. I'll be focusing on how customers can leverage native AWS security services to layer and orchestrate threat detection and monitoring for your security orchestration. The topics we will cover today, first and foremost, how to scale deployment of some of our security services and what are some of the best practices related to that. Detection of threats, some of the newly launched features in our native AWS security services and best practices around providing visibility as well as taking actions for automated response and remediation. And then how to aggregate and have continuous monitoring and visibility in one place. So with that, let's jump in. First and foremost, want to cover deployment at scale. When it comes to identifying events and or security issues, or even identifying what is a security issue versus not, there can be a lot of noise and signal to noise ratio. So as customers are adopting AWS workloads, our mission is to ensure that AWS is the most secure place for customers to build applications, innovate on AWS. To increase the operational efficiency of your application developers and or your DevOps teams, you need to have an integrated security operational process that can provide that continuous visibility for ongoing monitoring, and then also the ability to proactively detect any inadvertent activity and or any threats, and have full visibility across that. With AWS, you can view the AWS account as your logical construct, which is where you add workloads such as databases, storage, compute. Your accounts with regards to IAM principles reside there. And also all your networking configurations are in that construct of that logical separation called AWS account. Within the AWS account, there's also a lot of telemetry that is being generated. Now, typically, customers can leverage that telemetry and then send it off to security tools or send it off to an external SIEM, et cetera, and gather information. But what we've done is that we've provided native AWS security services that automatically integrate at the AWS account level and gather the required telemetry to provide that ease of use and provide that automation that customers need at the account level, and these services can be enabled at the AWS account level. So first and foremost, we have Amazon GuardDuty, which is our core threat detection and monitoring service. Once enabled at the AWS account level, GuardDuty automatically collects all the telemetry that's required and then provides customers insights into findings which are related to either known threats and or abnormal activity. Secondly, we have Amazon Macie, which integrates natively at the AWS account level with your storage workloads in Amazon S3, and then is able to provide continuous control plane monitoring of your S3 buckets, provide visibility into where all your data is and what all is the security posture of the data. And then thirdly, we have Amazon Inspector, which was just recently re-announced and relaunched at reInvent 2021. Amazon Inspector is focused on providing full vulnerability management for your EC2 instance workloads as well as container workloads. And then it detects automatically any operating system package and or software vulnerabilities and reports them in the form of findings. Now, the big advantage here is that all these services can be enabled at the account level. They also support the multi-account management with AWS organization for enabling and managing them at scale, and then also centrally aggregating all of their findings. So security teams can actually go in and enable these services and then manage them centrally from one place. When it comes to ease of use, another important aspect is that none of these security services actually require customers to enable logging. This is something that I like to reemphasize again because obviously when we're talking to customers on a daily basis, sometimes I ask them like, how are you solving for threats and how are you solving for vulnerabilities? And I often hear that we enabled flow logs or we enabled CloudTrail APIs so that we could get that information from Guard Duty or get that information from Security Hub or Inspector, and that's not the case. So the recommended practice is that if you're really looking for insights and findings which are meaningful for your security team, even if you're routing them to a downstream SIM or aggregating them there, you don't need to enable the logging services to get that security insight from these services. They automatically have a backend integration with the required telemetry and logs that are needed so that they can provide insights into where exactly do the security teams need to go and take actions on. The third service that I want to highlight is AWS Security Hub. So AWS Security Hub is our centralized monitoring as well as security posture assessment service. That is where customers can aggregate the findings from native AWS security services and also third-party partner integrated services and bring all those findings in one place for a quote-unquote single pane of glass for their security teams. Security Hub also does ongoing control evaluations. So as your AWS environments are growing and as you are adding more workloads or as you're adding new AWS accounts, it continuously monitors controls and provides you insights into where could be potential gaps from security best practices, and then reports that as findings as well. So using the combination of findings that are already reported from other native security services, as well as the security best practices and the posture assessment of your AWS workloads, you can then take automated actions from Security Hub. From an outbound standpoint, Security Hub also becomes then that aggregation point where you can integrate your SIM, like if you're using security incident event monitoring, or you have downstream automation using EventBridge or CloudWatch events, and you want to invoke step functions or lambdas to take actions, that is where you can also automate those response and remediation actions. And then finally, we have Amazon Detective, which is our native security service that's focused on helping security teams identify what could be a potential security issue from events that are being gathered, and also to troubleshoot and differentiate between a normal or an abnormal event versus a security issue. So Detective is actually collecting all the telemetry over a period of time and creating what we call a behavioral graph database. And the behavioral graph database is a technology that's used to correlate information that is collected from various different data sources and then create a node graph database. So for example, customers can then easily navigate from an IP address that they observed, which was causing a spike in the API usage or network usage, and then correlate that easily to a resource such as an instance, and then see what actions are being performed on that instance by what IAM role and using what session or assertion used by that session, and then uncover the root cause analysis of that incident or event. We've also integrated now Detective natively with Guard Duty so that from a Guard Duty finding, you can actually pivot to Detective and investigate. So where security operation teams or more robust threat investigation and or incident investigation teams need to have visibility into the root cause analysis, they can now do that easily from Guard Duty findings themselves. Or if you're aggregating them all in Security Hub, Security Hub also provides the user experience to investigate those events and findings using Detective as well. So this is the mental model that we recommend customers to leverage if you're using the native AWS security services to provide a fully layered security approach when it comes to threat detection and monitoring. All of these services are natively integrated with AWS organizations. So what that means is that not only can they be enabled at the AWS account level easily within a few clicks, but you can also delegate a centralized management account, which could be your centralized security operations team or your centralized security team. And then from there, you can then easily onboard multiple member accounts to these services. So that eliminates the need of going into every single account and enabling the service, and then makes the multi-member account management much more easier and simpler. Additionally, each one of these services report findings. So if you have a centralized management account that you've delegated, you can then aggregate those findings in your centralized accounts as well. So again, one of the best practices that we recommend is to leverage the AWS organization integration that is available in all these services. So next, one of the primary use cases that we hear from customers is detection of threats, vulnerabilities, and suspicious events. So we'll dive into some of the security services, what are some of the key features and enhancements that you can leverage, and then I'll also show you a walkthrough from the AWS console on how these services operate. So the first service is Amazon GuardDuty. As I mentioned, GuardDuty is our foundational threat detection service. It's actually one of our most used AWS security service, primarily because of the ease of use of enabling the service at the AWS account level, and then the value that it provides. It's simply a one-click enablement in your AWS console. Once you enable the service, it automatically then starts monitoring all the event and the telemetry around AWS accounts, IAM activity, network activity, as well as any API calls which are being made. And then is then automatically providing insights in the form of findings, which are either a match to a known malicious threat and or an abnormal activity or an unusual activity. It's also continuous, so once you enable GuardDuty, it'll start reporting findings and start detecting those events. And then the next most important aspect there is to act on those findings using the metadata and the contextual details that are included in those findings. GuardDuty is also providing customers with managed threat intelligence as part of the service itself. So I'll share some of the details on how the service works, but it basically leverages managed threat intelligence from AWS combined with our security partners, and additionally provides customers the flexibility to add their own threat intelligence as well. And then it leverages a machine learning model in the backend where it can then highlight what is unusual or suspicious activity when it comes to your workloads. Some of the key features that we've introduced in the service lately, first and foremost, as I highlighted, GuardDuty does not require any additional logging to be enabled. Once the service is enabled, it automatically builds a channel for the required telemetry through all the data sources that it needs to identify to report threats. So for instance, all of the network activity is recorded in flow logs in VPC and or DNS flow logs. GuardDuty already has a built-in channel where it brings in that required telemetry from that backend integration that it has without customers needing to enable those flow logs. Also, all of the account activity, whether it's IAM roles, whether it's workloads, it's all recorded in CloudTrail APIs. So GuardDuty uses that telemetry automatically as well. And then more lately, we've actually introduced S3 protection in GuardDuty, which was launched approximately 12 months ago. And then additionally, just recently this year, we've launched EKS Kubernetes audit log protection using GuardDuty as well. So if you have container workloads with EKS, the audit logs are automatically now monitored using GuardDuty once you enable that service. If you already have GuardDuty enabled, you will have an option to opt in to some of these new features that are being added. For example, S3 protection or EKS protection. There's an easy enablement option which you can enable at the organization level. Once it collects all this telemetry, then it's sent to the managed threat intelligence engine. The Managed Threat Intelligence Engine is where we are collecting a lot of IOCs or indicators of compromise and or threat intelligence in the form of malicious IP addresses, malicious domains, etc. So that is our own AWS's curated threat intelligence. Additionally, we're also collecting threat intelligence from our partners, such as Proofpoint or CrowdStrike, and we are providing that in the form of a managed service through GuardDuty. Any matches to that threat intelligence, so for example, if we see an IP address or a domain that has been reported in the command and control type activity, or has been reported as a bad malicious URL or a known bad entity, we will report that as a finding. The second is where GuardDuty is using the machine learning model or the machine learning engine and then reporting and learning what is the usual behavior and then reporting any unusual API and or unusual activity as well. So the combination of those two, we report findings which are either a known threat and or abnormal activity, and then they are available in the console in the form of GuardDuty findings with appropriate prioritization, and then the details on what resources impacted, what are the actions that you can take on some of those items. When it comes to the second service, that's Amazon Inspector, and Amazon Inspector is solely dedicated on vulnerability management. So Inspector was relaunched at reInvent last year, and that is a brand new service with the same name. The previous older service is now known as Amazon Inspector Classic. So if you go to your AWS console, you'll see now an option for Inspector, and then enabling that will lead you to the new service. Inspector has been relaunched and provides some new functionality as part of the service that has been relaunched. First and foremost, it requires no additional proprietary agent, which was one of the big user experience enhancements that we made. Inspector now is integrated with the existing Systems Manager agent or the SSM agent, which is deployed with most of the AMIs by default, or customers are already using the SSM agent. So when it comes to providing coverage for vulnerability management on instances, Inspector internally integrates natively with the SSM agent to collect that telemetry. Secondly, we've enhanced and scaled Inspector's coverage to now container workloads in addition to instance workloads. So Inspector now supports your container registries in ECR, and if you're using container images, it can detect vulnerabilities there as well. We've also scaled the scope of that beyond just operating system vulnerabilities to language packs. So for example, if you're deploying images using Ruby or Java or Node.js, we can detect vulnerabilities in container images with language packs as well. Some of the other enhancements that have been made is that just like GuardDuty, Inspector is actually one-click enablement. What that means is that you can just go to your account and enable Inspector, and there is no need to create scheduled jobs anymore. So once enabled, Inspector is continuously monitoring your inventory of workloads that are supported for vulnerability management. It provides you a snapshot of all the account coverage, and then additionally within those accounts, what all are your EC2 instances which are being managed by the SSM agent, which ones are not, and then automatically detects any changes or updates to the container registries, as well as new images are being pushed to the container registry. It automatically populates all of that inventory. After doing that, it's also doing a continuous scanning, and it detects any changes that are being made to these resources. So it'll first perform a baseline scan, report any findings, and then after that, it'll go ahead and then perform a differential scan only if there are changes being made to the resources. So for example, if a new operating system or a new software package is being installed on the instance, or a new container image is getting pushed, it'll automatically detect that and then do a scan on that new resource. and report any findings. One of the other enhancements that we made is that the findings in Inspector are now contextualized to provide the appropriate risk scoring that is a combination of the CVV's NVD score that we received from the NVD database or from the vendor database, and a combination of Inspector's contextualized score as well. So we keep an internal score with Inspector now within the service, which is a combination of, again, the CVE, but also if you have instances or network resource, instances that are reachable to the network. One of the other features that Inspector provides is that in addition to detecting vulnerabilities in the software and operating systems, it can also detect resources that are reachable directly to the internet. So the network reachability findings add to that contextual risk scoring of Inspector. And when it comes to findings, it reports all the findings in AWS console. And then additionally, it also is able to integrate directly with EventBridge, CloudWatch events, and then send those findings to Security Hub. When it comes to enabling Inspector, it can be enabled at the AWS account level. And additionally, it can be integrated with AWS organizations as well. Once enabled, it'll automatically collect all the resources that it detects in your environment in that account or multiple accounts, and then we'll start performing an automated scan and then report the findings. Another big performance improvement and then usability improvement that we made is that Inspector actually now monitors the life cycle of the finding and can update the finding once it's reported. So for instance, if you launch an instance using an AMI and we detect that there's a software vulnerability or operating system vulnerability, we will report that as a finding. It'll have all the contextual details of why and what CVE did it match and whether or not there was network reachability in that finding or not, or that resource. And then if you go ahead and, let's say, patch the instance, or you go ahead and address the network reachability by strengthening the VPC policies or group policies, then it will automatically update that finding and then remediate that, or update the state of the finding as well, so that the security teams have visibility that whether the development team took an action or the resource vulnerability is now addressed. We're also continuously updating the NVD database. So there's an update on the NVD database side, so we're collecting the CVEs and constantly updating that database as well. So if there's new CVEs that are getting reported, we will then, in lieu of that, also either generate new findings or update existing findings as well. So let's take a look at some of these services in the console. I'm going to pivot here to the demo and bring up the AWS console. If we can switch to the demo, or perfect. So this is my AWS console here, and the first service I'm highlighting is GuardDuty. You'll notice here, when you enable the service, one of the first things that I recommend customers to do is go to their accounts, and if during enabling the service, you're leveraging what is called the centralized delegated management, you'll have an option to delegate a centralized management account in the settings. And once you do that, in the Accounts tab, you'll have various different member accounts that will be listed here. You can simply, by choosing one-click option here, you can enable and invite those or add those member accounts, which will automatically enable GuardDuty on those accounts as well. All of these security services come with a free trial, so GuardDuty comes with a 30-day free trial, which is also one of the best ways to estimate what would be its usage and cost. As I mentioned, GuardDuty is based on collecting telemetry from various data sources. So once it's enabled, we will start listing down all the various different events and the telemetry range that it's collecting. And then we will report the usage details in the usage tab. So most of the times when customers ask, what is the best way to tell what GuardDuty will cost, you can actually enable it during your 30-day free trial. Once enabled at the organization level, we will reflect what is your free trial usage, and then that is what you should expect as your ongoing post-trial cost as well. Additionally, if you have GuardDuty already enabled, some of the new features that we introduced are S3 protection, which can be easily enabled at all the accounts level. And then similarly, as I mentioned, the Kubernetes protection is a brand new feature that we just launched in Q1 of this year. So that allows for the EKS audit log protection using GuardDuty as well. And that is really all that's involved in enabling the service. Once it's enabled, then it'll start reporting findings in the service. These findings will be the combination of known malicious threats that are reported and the matches, as well as abnormal or unusual activity. You can see here that these findings are reported with various different types. I see that I have a Trojan finding with a DNS data exfiltration. I also have a cryptocurrency EC2 Bitcoin mining finding. And by clicking on these findings, I can easily view the contextual details of what's included in these findings. For instance, what is the resource that is being impacted, and then what are some of the attributes around that resource's, for example, ID, their AWS resource ARN, or what VPC or subnet ID are they using, what group ID their security group or IP configuration they are in, and then also what actions as a part of that threat were taken, or who is the threat actor where that request originated from. We also provide you additional information as to why we believe this is a threat and which threat intelligence data source did it match. So in this case, you can see that it matched from one of our partners' threat intelligence database. So this information is all available as part of the contextual details of the findings. You can also easily filter these findings based on various different criterias. And all these findings are available in the console, in EventBridge, and you can see each one of these events are actually JSON events, which allows you to create automation and orchestration on any one of these attributes as well. These findings are also automatically sent to Security Hub. Another option here that you see is the built-in option to now investigate with Detective. So if you have Detective enabled, one of the features that I mentioned Detective does is it collects all the telemetry for network APIs, and then also GuardDuty findings, and then correlates all of that so that you can easily pivot from GuardDuty. And if you want to answer the question, how must this security event has been manifesting over a period of time, for example, not only this instance right now, but in the last 6 months or last 12 months, you can actually go into Detective and pivot and investigate that as well. Another enhancement that we made in GuardDuty is to add more contextual detail around unusual findings. So unusual findings or abnormal findings are not necessarily security events because they could be actual actions that have been performed, but GuardDuty reported them as unusual because they haven't been performed earlier or they weren't in the machine learning trend. So to investigate that and to answer those questions more realistically, we've added more contextual details in unusual findings, such as what are the unusual APIs that are actually being performed, and by which threat actor or threat source, and then what is the usual action for that user or for that IAM role, or even for that account, and then why did we deem it to be unusual. So those are some of the additional details that are now available in GuardDuty. I want to take an example here so that you can see how this layered security approach works. You can see here I have a finding for SSH brute force, which is being reported on an EC2 instance that is involved. And one of the reasons for this could be either that instance is reachable from network sources, which could potentially lead to a compromise on that instance, or it could be then, could be compromised for either crypto mining or cryptojacking type activity as well. Additionally, if there are software vulnerabilities on this instance, I would want to know that as well, so that I want to make sure that if for business reasons, there is a need to open this port for somebody to connect into, there's actually no software exploits on that instance. So now let's pivot to Inspector. And Inspector is again enabled at the AWS account level. This is a brand new interface for Inspector. As I mentioned, as part of the relaunch, we actually made sure that the user experience was aligned with all of our other native security services as well. Inspector, similar to GuardDuty, has the ability for customers to set up in settings the AWS centralized management account, and then in account management has the option to select one or many multiple accounts and then enable the service from a centralized management account or the AWS organization account as well. Once Inspector is enabled, you can then easily pivot to the resource tabs here, such as instances, your container repositories, and even all the way down to the images, to view that Inspector has automatically detected all your instances in your account. I have a few instances here which are automatically scanning, because as soon as Inspector is enabled and it detects that there's an SSM agent already installed on that instance, it automatically starts scanning that instance. There's no action required from the users. Additionally, it also tells me that I have a few instances here which are unmanaged. That essentially means that the SSM agent is not installed on those instances. I can also go into the repositories for the containers and view all of the container repositories here, and then go all the way down to images as well. This inventory is automatically updated, so anytime new resources are added, they'll be automatically populated here. And if Inspector is enabled at the account level, it'll automatically start scanning them. In addition to the inventory evaluation, it also starts providing information related to vulnerabilities and network reachability findings on the dashboard. So first and foremost, it's telling me how much of my AWS environment is actually covered for vulnerability management. So I can easily pivot from here to either the instances or the repositories which are not covered with Inspector's coverage. I can also view how many of these are critical findings, which means they either match the CVE severity and or they match our Inspector score, which is contextualizing. The risk remediation also tells me which one of the packages that I have deployed are vulnerable and how widely are they being deployed across various different resources. So for instance, I can see here that this package right here is being leveraged by 2 different resources, and I can either pivot from the package name to see what are the vulnerabilities in there, or I can go back and pivot to the resources that are being leveraging those packages. Additionally, the dashboard tells me more details around the breakup of the container repositories as well as the instances which have the most critical findings and or vulnerabilities. I can see that the instance which was reported for brute force in GuardDuty as part of that finding is also listed here, and there are indeed some critical findings on that instance. So if I dive deeper into, I can look at what are those findings. So there's multiple different software vulnerabilities that are reported, and I can also view if there are any network reachability findings reported as well. We also have this new findings dashboard now that reports all of the findings as a combination. If you want to filter out and create your own rules on how you want to view these findings, you can do that as well. Additionally, these findings are available in the console, also available as event bridge events, and then sent to Security Hub automatically as well. Just like GuardDuty, each one of these are individual JSON events. The big difference here is that, as I mentioned, the contextual details of these findings will include additional details around what was reported in the finding, what were the impacted packages or vulnerability details, and details around the CVE that was reported. And then additionally, if the Inspector score, which we adjust automatically based on additional vectors such as network reachability and or the resource constraints around that resource. You can see it's the combination of the CVSS score and then the inspector score. When I go to findings by instance, as I mentioned, one of the other features that now inspector includes is to include findings for network reachability as well. If you have resources that are reachable by the network, those will be reported here as well. So you can filter these here by finding or vulnerability ID, where you can match them with a CVE that you are interested in. And this will list in all those CVEs. And additionally, you can also look for network reachability findings here that are available. We also continue to update the status of the finding. So if, let's assume you download a new software on the instance and we identify a vulnerability there, or you go ahead and patch the instance and you change the state of that instance, we will automatically detect that change and will update the status of the finding in inspector, so that if you're using these findings for downstream automation, you'll get that continuous visibility as part of that as well. As part of the network reachability findings, we are not only telling customers as to what is the network reachability. So for example, here you can see for this instance, inspector has reported that port 2022 is reachable, but it'll also report what path is being taken to reach to that resource through the internet. So we'll give you the AWS ARN or the resource ID for each one of these entities as to right from the internet gateway, if you're using ALB, ELB, or what security groups or network ACLs are being used, and which is where you need to go and take an action to protect that instance from being reachable from external. So that's an overview on inspector. Let's go back to seeing how we can aggregate these findings using Security Hub. So when it comes to aggregation and continuous monitoring, that is where Security Hub helps customers bring all these findings into one place. Security Hub is our centralized monitoring and cloud security posture assessment service. It really serves three key important aspects for customers. First and foremost, it's collecting findings from not only native AWS services automatically, but it's also bringing in findings from integrated partner tools. So assume you're using a network gateway appliance, or you're using an endpoint detection and remediation product. You can actually integrate those with Security Hub as well to send all those findings into Security Hub. So then you have one single place or single pane of glass to view all the findings from all your security services. Additionally, we've actually lately introduced a feature where customers ask that enabling AWS organization and getting aggregation around accounts is very helpful, but they also needed the ability to view findings across all regions. So as AWS organizations is a regional service, we've now provided a cross-regional aggregation in Security Hub as well. So you can now aggregate findings from multiple regions in one place as well. You can designate a home region and then bring all the findings from other regions into that home region. The second main feature that Security Hub provides is for the security teams to be able to prioritize exactly where they need to take actions on. As I mentioned, one of the core features that Security Hub provides is to evaluate your security posture and security controls. So Security Hub leverages AWS config in the backend to ensure that it's monitoring controls across all your AWS resources. So as you are creating VPC groups, or you are creating encryption keys or secret keys, and or adding workloads when it comes to storage or databases, et cetera, it's automatically evaluating those controls in the backend and then measuring them against known good practices. We've actually aggregated these controls and created what is called best practice standards in Security Hub. So there are two internal standards, AWS Foundational Security Best Practices, as well as CIS benchmarks. And there are a combination of 100+ controls that are automatically being evaluated. We also continue to enhance and add more controls to these standards based on new workloads that are coming up. And deviation from those standards are then reported as findings in Security Hub, which gives the security teams the ability to prioritize where are the more critical actions that you need to take on. Starting from the get-go of if you have an IAM principal which does not have MFA or multi-factor authentication enabled, or somebody is using root credentials in certain resources, those are some of the severely and high critical findings that will be reported in Security Hub right away. The third big benefit of Security Hub is that it normalizes all these findings into what is called Amazon Security Finding Format, so that security teams as well as incident response teams have one format to deal with, and they can easily orchestrate automation and response actions. Security Hub also provides downstream integration with third-party partner tools where you can either send all these findings and events to a SIM tool, or you can build your own custom CloudWatch rules to invoke Lambda and step function and then take collective operations against these findings. So, excuse me. That is where Security Hub helps with aggregating these findings and then helping customers take response and remediation actions as well. So when it comes to bringing findings across multiple accounts and regions, and then viewing findings across multiple resources, Security Hub is the easiest way to respond and remediate to these findings as well. Let's take a look at Security Hub in the AWS console with a quick demo. So Security Hub is enabled at the AWS account level as well. And one of the key features that it provides is once enabled, it gathers all the controls and provides an executive score of how secure your AWS workloads are. This score is actually a combination of the standards that are being enabled, both AWS Foundational Security Best Practices and the CIS Foundational Benchmark, which are internal standards. And additionally, we also have an external standard, which is PCI DSS. Again, as part of our security services, Security Hub also includes a 30-day free trial. And then in the settings, you can actually now enable the multi-account management if you're delegating a centralized management account. But in addition to that, you can also enable cross-regional aggregation, where you can designate a home region and then bring all the findings across all of your organizations from other regions as well. Once this is done, Security Hub will then evaluate the controls and start reporting these findings by region and or by built-in insights which are built into the service. The insights are essentially aggregated findings based on what are most commonly answered questions from customers. So things like what are the AWS resource where you must go and take an action or are being reported in most of the findings from security services. And you can categorize these by customized resources as well. So for example, what are the KMS keys that have not been rotated, or what are the secrets, manager secrets that need to be rotated, or what are the S3 buckets which are publicly accessible and have some security controls that are being gaps. These insights are essentially a filter on the findings that are being reported on the findings tab of Security Hub. So customers do have the ability to create their custom insights as well. So you could go to the findings tab and aggregate findings based on your criteria and then create a custom insight so that you can easily filter those findings as well. Additionally, you can go to the security standards page now, and then from here you can dive into what exactly are the controls that are not being met, which are leading to these scores. And then also view the remediation actions that you should take to actually correct that operation. So for example, I have a security score of 84%, and I can go and dive deeper into the results of why that's the case. I can see here that there are 24 controls that are failed out of the 153 that are enabled, and then they are all ranked by severity where I need to go and take actions on. So this is a way to filter out and view where you would want to take actions on um, when it comes to best practices and or security controls. From here, I can also easily filter if I have an overly permissible VPC rule. I can easily filter that control or the combination of those controls. Or I can just go to the findings page and start filtering from there. Now, if you go back to my use case earlier where I showed you that guard duty had reported a finding where I was getting an RDP brute force request, and then when we viewed that instance in Inspector, we could see that that instance had software vulnerabilities reported as well as port 22 open for network reachability. All of that information is actually available in Security Hub already. So I can go here and group by service name or group by EC2 instance image ID or one of these attributes that are shown here. And by doing that, I can easily bring up all the different findings by instance ID, image ID in this case. So if I click on one of these images now, or which is the AMIs, I can see all of the findings and the product that reported those findings here as well. So I can see the inspector findings with software vulnerabilities on that image, and then the guard duty findings in one place as well. Additionally, if I group these by the EC2 subnet ID, which is what's reported in guard duty, I can also view that that subnet ID has reported Security Hub controls that are lacking as well. Now, this is a way using the finding contextual data in guard duty and using the attributes such as subnet ID or VPC ID, and then coming to Security Hub to evaluate what security gaps are there in those resources and how to address those gaps and what actions or response remediations you want to take. If we go to one of the Security Hub findings here with regards to any of the security gaps, we will report the remediation actions as well. And then that's what customers can orchestrate for automation, downstream automation and response. All of these findings here are again available in CloudWatch events. So when it comes to sending them downstream, there are integrations that are already built in Security Hub. So if you're using security incident and monitoring, security incident and event monitoring tools such as Splunk or Sumo Logic, etc., those are all available here to be integrated so that you can send these findings downstream. Also, for intake of findings, there are integrations available for tools or services that you might be using in your environment as well. And finally, for the full workflow management, Security Hub does provide the ability to define custom actions. So for instance, if guard duty is reporting a URL, which was reported as a threat, and it's reported as a finding, you can actually orchestrate a downstream automation action to block that URL in your web gateway or add that to the block policy in the AWS network firewall as well. So those are some of the custom actions that you can create. And custom actions are essentially a collection of rules that will invoke the appropriate Lambda or step functions, which will take the actions for the security teams and automate that response. And these custom actions, once created, either they are simply creating tickets in Jira or Slack, which are integrated natively in Security Hub as part of the integration as well, or taking much more robust actions are all available from the Findings tab, where you can choose a finding and invoke that action from here as well. So going back to our presentation, and then the final step of automating response and remediation, that is really where Security Hub comes into play as well, is to aggregate and collect all those findings and then help customers take automated response actions. So first and foremost, Security Hub does enable for automated response and remediation with built-in integrations, as well as the ability to create custom rules or custom actions that can be done to invoke step functions and lambdas to take actions. Or you can use integrations that are built into Service Security Hub and then send out notifications, alerts, or ticketing to tools that are already available. And then finally, also to help the security teams inform the development teams where the security controls need to be bolstered or improved. So these are examples of how an automated response can be architected using Security Hub. So some of the key takeaways, the native security services provide the automation so that customers don't have to aggregate and collect raw logs and telemetry, but provide the right insights in the form of findings where you can go and take actions and the details in the findings that allow you to orchestrate the downstream automation. It helps reduce the security burden and bridges the gap between the development teams and the security teams by telling where are the resources where there could be potential security gaps or vulnerabilities, whether it's instances, whether it's container workloads, and or as it relates to threats and or incidents. And then centralize the aggregation of these findings in one place. So enabling these security services at your AWS account level can help manage the security services easily from one single place, and integrating the security services into your DevOps workflows can bridge that gap between providing the development team visibility into what are some of the key actions that they should be taking on, or what are some of the best practices that should be taking when it comes to security best practices. To conclude, here are some of the key use cases that you can leverage. First and foremost, centralizing threat detection and monitoring. This can be done by enabling Guard Duty as well as Security Hub. Improving your security posture assessment. Security Hub provides controls that are available as well as standards that provides you an executive score from where you can pivot down to individual controls that are failing and or how to address that and remediation actions. Optimizing your vulnerability management. Enabling Inspector can help you provide visibility into vulnerabilities for your instance and container workloads, and then provide that full workflow of vulnerability management. Using Detective, you can streamline the root cause analysis of security events using the behavioral graph database. And some of our other services, such as Macy, you can leverage to improve visibility across where all your data is, and then also detect any sensitive data that you might have in your storage workloads. And then finally, leveraging Security Hub, you can aggregate this and then automate response and remediation for your downstream actions. So those are some of the key use cases I'll leave you with. And then there's additional resources that are available in the form of AWS Skill Builder that helps you orchestrate and do hands-on exercises, as well as some of our security certifications are available in our AWS certification catalog. We do have a security specialty there as well for your teams to actually leverage these services. And then other mechanisms that are available are workshops, which I highly recommend. There are hands-on exercises for teams. And then if you need additional support, feel free to reach out to your AWS sales account manager, and then we will engage to do either security immersion days and or security best practices with our customers. With that, thanks a lot for joining.